Danielle, welcome to the show.
Thanks, Aiden. So happy to be here.
Yeah, it's very excited to have you on. So, there's a lot of very interesting things that we can talk about, but why don't we start with in your career, who's been your most favorite or memorable boss and why?
So I would say that my favorite boss would be Helen. So she was the first manager that I had at GitHub. And the first time I met her, um, this was the first time I'd ever had a woman of color who was my manager in engineering. This was something that was incredibly special to me just to have that sort of experience that I could look up to. Also, literally, because she's like 6 feet tall, so literally looked up to her. But she also was one of the most amazing coaches that I'd ever had the pleasure to work with. And she would ask these questions, and it would really make you stop and think and be like, wait, why am I asking that question? What do I actually need here? And then it would eventually just, you would come to the conclusion yourself of what actually needed to happen. And she's actually the one who inspired me to become a manager, because I saw somebody who looked like me, who was doing all of these really amazing things. And she was such an amazing coach that I was like, I want to be like that. Like, that's who I want to be in the future. And so really just being able to have somebody like that to look up to and to really show me the ways of like what management could be, was really inspiring. So Helen has always had a special place in my heart. We're still very good friends. We talk very often, all the time. Like every 2 weeks we have a call. We hang out a lot. But yeah, so she's always been an amazing person in my life. Lynn has been another one. NIE is another one. And Jim, they've all been really amazing managers in my life. And I've learned something from each and every one of them.
That's amazing. So, tell me about this questioning, like this coaching questioning tactic. Like, what's an example of how she would use that?
So sometimes I would get stuck, so I was a fairly early career engineer when I had met her, and sometimes I would get stuck on a problem, and I would say, like, I can't figure out, like, why isn't this person like working with me? Like, what is wrong with this? Like, they should just be doing this. And she was like, well, what are you looking for? And I'd be like, well, looking to solve this problem. And she was like, well, what do you need from this person? And we're like, for them to fix the problem with me. And she's like, well, have you tried asking them? We're like, no. So and then we would dive into like, okay, well, what kind of communication styles have I tried with this person? Maybe this person talks in a very different way, communicates in a very different way than I do. Maybe they have a different understanding of the problem that I do. And so, maybe the solution is I need to just go talk to them and be like, hey, can I set up some time with you to talk through this problem, and to show you why this is important to me, and it's a priority for me in order to figure this out. And maybe help them understand why I'm being so insistent on this particular problem, instead of immediately going to my manager and saying like, this person is so difficult to work with. Is like, okay, well, what are the things that you have tried, and what are you actually looking out of, what are you looking to get out of this relationship, and how would you be able to get what you are looking for from that other person.
Yeah. And this is not an easy thing to do either, right? Like I feel like the your gut instinct might be to just say, okay, well, this is what you do. I know that person, like, go do this and that'll work. But you almost have to hold yourself from doing that.
Yeah, definitely. And especially with social media and everything, in the past, I had worked in trust and safety, so making sure that the internet is a safe place to be. It's very easy to jump to conclusions and to villainize the other person and have it be a very us versus them sort of discourse. Social media encourages that. You make snap decisions based on one single phrase that's out of context. But if there's one thing that I have really learned from Helen, is that everybody is living their own story. And so one of the things that she actually used to do is invite other stakeholders from around the company to our regular meetings. And that is something that I still try to do today, because everybody has different priorities. Support has a different priority. Product has different priorities. Sales has different priorities. But if they don't understand what engineering priorities are, then all they're going to see is their own needs are not being met. And so one of the things that I did learn from Helen is she would invite people from legal, she would invite people from support to our mini summits. So those are in-person gatherings where it's an offsite. We talk about our roadmap, we talk about all sorts of things that we are planning on doing, and she would involve them in this decision-making process. So we would do exercises together to say, what is it hard to do, as a user on GitHub? What is it hard to do as a community manager at GitHub? And then we write out all these problem statements, and then we would prioritize them based on, what do we agree as a group of like, what's the highest priority item? And because they were involved in the decision-making process, they could see, oh, my pet project may not be as important as these other things that are currently on fire. And that helped have this understanding of, we're not ignoring you. It's just that these other things are so much more on fire. And so that's something that I try to bring with me with my relationships, particularly across the company, which is, these are our priorities. These are our fires that we're fighting. Let me try and understand your fires and try to understand where they slot in together. And hopefully we can all understand like when the work can be done, and like what kind of trade-offs we can do.
Yeah, I think that's amazing. Like it sounds like you're just actively going out and building empathy for. I mean, we often talk about empathy for the user
Mhm.
of our products, but this is super interesting to almost look at it, in different departments within the organization, like trying to deeply understand them. But you're right, like it does bring up a lot of the same sorts of concepts of, what goes on the internet. I was going to ask you, so as it relates to safety, what kind of safety principles? I know you talk a lot about psychological safety, for example. What does psychological safety mean to you when it comes to teams?
To me, that means that people have the ability to speak up about their needs, and they feel safe being able to do so, and they feel like their boundaries are being respected. To me, consent and safety are incredibly important, because that means that people are able to contribute fully to all of the ideas that are on the team. That means that somebody is able to say, hey, I have an idea, and somebody else could have an opposing idea, but both ideas are heard, they're respected. We may not go with both of them, we may go with a different one, but everybody feels like they're able to contribute fully, and that they're not going to be penalized for who they are, or a part of their identity or something, but they're still able to contribute in a safe and effective manner to anything that's on the team.
Yeah, and how does that, would you say, relate to emotional intelligence?
I would say that you really have to be able to understand a lot of different facets about a person, or even be able to learn. If you don't know something about a person, you are able to sit down, learn from their point of view and their lived experience, through that emotional intelligence, so that you can say, I may have had these experiences, but you have had these experiences, and this is how your experience is contributing to this conversation. And so it's really important for to improve the emotional intelligence on a team in order to increase psychological safety. Because if you have the emotional intelligence to ask those questions and to be able to learn from another person's lived experience, then that means that you become a much more well-rounded person. It means that you're able to adapt to new situations, or new to you situations, and you can learn from somebody and say like, oh, I'm sorry, I didn't realize that meant that to you. How can I be better? And so that's something that I really try to do and really try to emphasize on my teams, is that we're never going to know everything. We're never going to fully be able to experience what somebody else is experiencing. But what you can do is you can ask questions, and you can ask, how can I be better? Or what does this mean to you? How can I learn, and how can I be better? And really just flex that muscle of being mildly uncomfortable in able to encourage that collaboration and encourage that relationship with your teammates.
Yeah, I think that makes a lot of sense. And it is also, it brings back the notion that you were talking about of even bringing people from other teams so that you can expose them to their needs and like their ways of working. Um, are there other things that you would also recommend or that you can also do to increase psychological safety within teams?
So one of the things that I am currently trying right now is um, cross-pollination, being able to move people from different teams, try moving them onto a different team and see like, is there like different cultures that we can merge together? Are there different team processes that we can merge together here? How do we improve the communication? How do we improve the collaboration? So I actually have I've got a couple of teams right now that report up to me, and something that we're actually trying to do is we're moving 2 engineers from one team and putting them onto another team, and they're all pairing together. So everyone has a pair from a different team. And so one team is actually formerly from Microsoft, one team is formerly, old time GitHub. And so really trying to like merge the 2 teams together and say like, what can we learn from one another? What are the technology stacks that we can learn from one another? What are the team processes that we can learn from one another? And so far it's been going really great. Like everybody's really happy with it. Everybody's learning a lot. There's a lot of free forming, exchange of ideas that are happening. One team is adopting another team's ways of planning and tracking projects. And they hit a snag fairly recently where they said, oh, we just discovered something. It's going to increase the amount of time for this estimate. And should we status yellow? Should we say like, okay, like this project needs a little bit of help. We're going to change the status on this particular project. And in the past, this team would not quite know how to handle it. There would be a lot of back and forth. It would be hard to say we need help, and it would be a lot easier to just be like, oh, we don't know, like everything is wrong. And it was hard to be flexible about those kinds of things. But with the merging of the 2 teams together, even temporarily, I've seen an increase in that flexibility where they have said, oh, well, here's a process that we have on this other team. Why don't we try doing it here? And that has actually increased the flexibility of the other team. And everyone seems a lot happier that they're able to like learn from one another and be a lot more flexible and continue to move quickly in this project.
Yeah, I think that's such a cool tactic. Just like replacing people. I've heard of leaders sometimes doing this, where a leader will take on another team, even if it's for a day or something. But this is super interesting to just take people from a team and put in another team, and the cross-pollination, as you put it. I think that's super interesting and something that, people should experiment with. I think they might be surprised with the results.
Yeah, definitely. I think the only thing that I would say about this one is it's easier when it's within an organization, because this way, your OKRs and your roadmaps can be adapted to, because you're all reporting up to the same roadmap. So, one team that may have less people now, their roadmap is a little bit smaller now. Whereas the team where everybody is on, where we're all swarming on, that team, their roadmap's a little bit bigger. And so really being able to make sure that we are balancing the expectations and the roadmap so that we can say, this is the most important thing. This is why we are swarming on this particular thing. But don't worry, the other roadmap is not forgotten. It's not less important. It's just going to be a little bit smaller for a specific amount of time.
Yeah, no, I think this is super valuable. Changing subjects for a second and talking about something that is tangentially related, which is this concept of an ask versus guess culture. You previously said that having an ask culture pays off, especially with distributed teams. I'd love for you to explain like what is an ask culture.
Yeah, so ask culture is something, let me start. So ask culture is something I actually learned from Catherine Wu. Her handle is KWu on the internet. I saw a really amazing talk that she did for Lead Dev some time ago, where she explains that ask culture is, I'll just tell them no. It's a very like Western style of thinking where if you have a problem or you have some feedback with me, just tell me and I'll stop doing it. And that tends to work for a lot of different cultures. But if you are a global company, then that doesn't always work because there's also guest culture. And guest culture is something that is a little bit more stereotypically Eastern culture, where it is seen as a burden to ask for something. It's a burden to be placed on somebody that you need something from them. And so there's a lot of going around a particular question so that you don't offend the other person. You're really paying a lot of attention to, maybe nonverbal cues or cultural cues or, hierarchy sometimes is something that plays a really big part of this. And so sometimes when you do have two different teams that merge together, or two different companies, or different geographical regions, sometimes when you merge them together, you can see some sort of conflict and friction there.
Yeah, I think that makes a lot of sense. And certainly with diverse and global teams, like this is something to keep in mind. Do you feel like some of this stuff also relates to maybe if you're working with someone a lot more senior, or like does power distance come into it as well? Because I feel like if you're more ask culture oriented, maybe it's even more of a I guess it may feel more burdensome if you are talking with someone a lot more senior than yourself.
Oh, definitely. I would say that power dynamics are huge, especially as you, grow in your own career. So I'm actually going to go take it from the opposite direction. I think it's a lot more important for leaders to, if they're talking to somebody who may be reporting up to them, that you shift to a little bit more of a guest culture standpoint, because as somebody who is looking up to somebody, or somebody who is speaking to somebody who is more senior in their career, maybe an early career developer will be incredibly uncomfortable asking for anything. It'll be too direct, it'll be too uncomfortable, maybe they don't feel like they are worth that person's time. Whereas I feel like it is very common for more senior leadership, myself included, sometimes I fall into this trap of, well, just ask me if you need something. My door is always open, my DMs are always open, on Slack, not on Twitter. But it is
Important distinction, yeah.
very important distinction. My DMs are open only on Slack, not on Twitter. But I do feel like as we move more up in senior leadership, we expect people to come to us with problems because there's so much to keep track of. There's so many things that are happening. We hope that our people will bring to us attention things that are happening within the organization. But from the inverse side, it is very intimidating to talk to somebody who is that high up the chain. What if you're wrong? What if you put a period in the wrong spot? What if you use too many exclamation points? There's a lot of anxieties around talking to somebody who is more senior to you. And so I say, as senior leadership or anybody who holds a position of authority, it is our responsibility to make that as easy as possible for somebody to do that, and to lead by example and make it as easy as possible to express an opinion if something is different. Make it easy for somebody to say like, I don't know about that, and be like, oh, okay, great, like please tell me, like, what do you think about this particular thing? So the way that I like to encourage disagreement, or encourage people to talk to me about what's going on in their heads, or like why they might think something differently of a particular decision, is I will actually ask questions and then provide a multiple choice. So if it's particularly with low stakes things, I will often, put in Slack of like, hey, I'm thinking of this. What do people think? Do we think yes? Do we think no? Or do we think like, I have thoughts on this one? And so just giving people those options of disagreeing on very low stake stuff, or like offering a different opinion, that means that it's much easier when it's a larger decision to say like, I don't know about that, because they've already had that sort of discourse with me. So sometimes I'll be like, sorry about that. Like I accidentally, forgot to reschedule our all hands. Do we want to try it on this day, or try it asynchronous? And so people will be like, asynchronous doesn't quite work. Like, what do we think about this day? And be like, great, perfect. Like, sorry, I forgot to do that, but like, thank you for your opinion. And then always publicly thank people for speaking up about something. Or if it's private DM, then like also, thank them there as well. But always thank somebody for having the courage to speak up to you, because it's a really, really hard thing for somebody to go to somebody who is more senior than them and say, I have an opinion, have you considered this? That's really vulnerable for them. And I still have those sorts of moments as well. And so, being validated in your opinion and being validated in the courage that it takes to speak up like that is something that we should celebrate, and something that will help encourage discussion in different power dynamics.
Yeah, so much to unpack there. I think like you bring up a very good point, right? I think a lot of us think that people will just come to us with problems, or if they have feedback for us, that they would just come and tell us. And I think, and I certainly had this discussion with other guests on the show as well, which is, well, I'm super friendly with my team, and so like, of course they would tell me. But you start to realize is that no matter how friendly you are, the fact of the matter is that you are the manager, and there is just, friends don't fire people, managers can fire people, so it's just different. And so I love that, like, two things. One is that you're asking for feedback, you're asking for these things, but your idea of like actually giving people multiple choices to make it easier to disagree is actually very clever. I like that a lot. And you're also saying that not only will it encourage them in that particular situation, but it kind of like builds the muscle of, this is okay, and you can do this over the course of time. So yeah, I like that a lot. That's very clever.
Thanks. One other thing I will say that has been really helpful, especially if you're not sure where to start in order to get that feedback. Plucky is a company that I just got these really fantastic cards from. It's beplucky.com. And they are this deck of cards to help you ask questions in your one-on-ones around different particular subjects. So this is something that I utilize particularly in skip level one-on-ones to ask, what is something that you think we should be talking about in our organization, but we aren't? And that leads to these amazing conversations of things that we normally wouldn't get to if I'm just asking for feedback. And if I'm just asking, hey, like, what could we do better? A lot of times I'll be like, I hear a lot of like, we're doing great. But Plucky is really great to be able to ask more in-depth questions so that you can really start digging into that. And so it's a little bit easier on the power dynamic there as well.
Yeah, I mean, it's and it's also this where could we improve? I mean, sometimes people have that answer off the top of their heads, but like normally it's not the sort of thing that you just like, well, yes, obviously all these things. Yeah, I like that. That's a really good approach. Speaking of your skip levels, how often do you do them? And like, do you do them in a group setting typically, or do you just randomly reach out and do virtual coffees? How do you go about it?
So for skip levels, I have them anywhere between once a month or once every 2 months. It really depends on the health of the organization. Sometimes it'll be spread out a little bit more, sometimes it'll be spread out a little bit less. I have 27 reports, I think, or sorry, 27 in my organization right now. So it can get a little bit hectic with that many folks. So sometimes you spread them out a little bit more, and then somebody will mention like, hey, we might want to check in a little bit more. Like one of my managers said, like, hey, we're trying something new. Can we make sure that we check in on all of the engineers so that it's going really well? And be like, okay, great. That's fantastic feedback. Let me go ahead and re-up those one-on-ones to be a little bit more frequent to really check in with everybody. But typically, because we're such a remote company, I will do a lot of check-ins in Slack as well, particularly if I've noticed the COVID cases in India are spiking, and I know that some of the folks on my organization have family over there. So I'll check in on Slack and say like, hey, just want to make sure you're okay. Like, is there anything I can do to help? And we'd be like, no, like, thank you for doing that. And then so even in between these one-on-ones, I'll make sure that I check in on Slack a little bit more frequently, particularly if I notice that there's, world events happening, if there's a lot of, things that might be happening that might be affecting people's morale. I'll check in and say like, hey, do you want to like meet up a little bit more? Do you want to skip this one? Because sometimes people might be really burnt out, and more meetings does not always necessarily mean better. Oftentimes it's the opposite, depending on how those meetings are run. But sometimes I'll have people. I have a skip level who recently reached out to me about 5 minutes before our skip level and said, "Hey, I'm actually not feeling well today. Do you mind if we reschedule?" And I was really happy to hear that, because something that I am a very big advocate about is mental health. And so, I have PTSD. This is something that I have struggled with for a very long time, a lot of anxiety, particularly around COVID. But this is something that I'm very familiar with, and I try to actively work that into how I manage. And so throughout all of COVID, I said, even from the very beginning, I said, this is a very stressful time. Your health and your safety comes first. And I said, there is a minimum floor now for PTO. So GitHub has unlimited PTO. If you look at the studies, people or companies in America with unlimited PTO, people tend not to use it. And I noticed that people weren't taking time off during COVID because we didn't know how long it was going to be. People were hoarding their vacation time, to have that big splashy party, at the end of summer, which never came. And so I noticed, parents were burning out, people were burning out. And I said, this is unacceptable. Your health and your safety comes first. And so it's very important for me, for all of you, to take a minimum of 1 day off every single month. And that has been a refrain for the past 15 months now. It has been worked into our all hands. It is the very first thing that I say to everybody every time we meet. And so because I am a very big advocate for mental health, this skip level felt comfortable telling me, I'm not feeling good today. Is it okay if we reschedule? And that is something that is really heartwarming to me, that they felt comfortable enough to speak up about their needs and say they weren't in the best position to meet today. Can we do this another time?
Yeah. And I think like this is evidence also that you've done a good job of building psychological safety where people can do things like that. And yeah, I love this concept, and that you're working it into your all hands, and constantly reminding people. I think that stuff, does matter, and makes a huge difference. So one topic I did want to talk with you about, Danielle, was goal setting. So you have this great article that's titled "Setting Goals with Your Engineers That Don't Completely Suck." And with a title like that, I have to ask you, like, what kind of goals should you avoid setting? And like, what are some common traps that people fall into?
Oh man. I mean, I would say that a very ineffective, terrible goal is like a New Year's resolution where they're way too broad and you only do them at like the first week of January, and gyms are very crowded, and everybody's eating salads and like basically starving themselves. And then like 2 weeks later, everybody has forgotten them. And then the year comes around again and you're like, oh, I have done nothing to further any of these goals. So I would say that's an example of a very bad goal or a very unstructured goal. For me, I look at goals kind of like OKRs or whatever acronym you want to use. But objective and key OKRs, objective key results. There we go. And really want to make them, scoped, make sure that they are small, make sure that they are achievable and that they're measurable. And another thing that I do want to add is I want to make sure that they are in alignment with the engineering ladders that you have, or any kind of career ladders that you have. Because if they are at any way disconnected, then it's not actually going to further that person's career. It's not going to actually be that effective. And so it can be, preferably career ladders that are within the company. But if you don't have them at your company, you should probably start building those into your company so that you can tether your reports' goals to that. And so really making sure that you make them small, make them measurable, make them tethered to your career ladders within the company, and also making sure that you are reviewing them on a regular basis. So when I had a smaller team, we would do this every month. Unfortunately, can't really do that anymore. So we review them more on a quarterly basis, and we take a look and we say, have we achieved this for you and your goals? Because I do feel like that's what one-on-ones are really for. That is something that I am very passionate about, is that one-on-ones are for your direct reports' career. It's not about status of projects, although sometimes you can go over them, but it's really about their career, and are we making sure that we are supporting them in a way that helps them grow? And the way that we measure that they are growing is we have these goals, we regularly look at them, we have artifacts for them, we have all of that documentation that's written down, and we can really measure, you're doing really great in these particular areas, but if we look at the career path, there are some of these other areas that we could use some improvement on. So a really great example for this is senior engineers who are looking to get promoted to staff engineer. And so this is something where I find goal setting is really, really helpful, because when you're a senior engineer, you've been doing this for a while, you understand like the rules of the game of being a senior engineer. But a lot of the times I see there's a big struggle in making that jump over to staff level engineer, because a staff level, at least here, is at the same level as a director. And that means you have the same level of influence, you have the same level of communication skills that are required. You have the same level of, did I say influence already? Influence again. And you have to be able to, talk to a room full of people and bring them along on a decision that you have made on a technical piece of, software. And so one of the things that I do find when I take somebody from senior to staff is really working on those leadership and those communication skills, those delegation skills. Those are incredibly important when you make that jump. And so without these goals, you can get somebody who is very frustrated and they say, I've worked on these projects, I've put in so many hours, I'm working really, really hard doing all of this old stuff that I'm very good at. Why am I not at that other level? Then I can point to these levels, these career levels, and say, well, you are really strong in a technical portion of this, but the leadership and the communication is where I need you to improve. And here are some measurable ways that you can improve so that we can get you from senior to staff level engineer.
Yeah, that's awesome. So you're basically, I mean, I like that these goals are very measurable. It's coordinated with the career ladder, like you said, and people can see themselves advancing, and they can kind of see down the tunnel, and they can see where it's going, and that it's possible to get there, and like what are the steps. I like that a lot. So one thing that we should also talk about is, and you kind of mentioned it in passing, how you are a fan of like productive meetings, and so some of your meetings are synchronous and some are asynchronous. I'd love for you to just tell us. I mean, we're huge fans of productive meetings here at Fellow, and so I wanted to ask you, what have you learned about like running really good meetings?
Oh man, I have learned that if you run a good meeting and if you run an effective meeting, people will want to be there. People will show up and they'll contribute. There's nothing worse than a meeting that is way too long, that rambles on for way too long, and people are obligated to be there. They feel like they are not able to say no to this. So I actually wrote an article fairly recently in Lead Dev on how to, I'm pretty sure the title is how to run meetings that don't suck as much. I've got a theme in how I write a lot of my articles. There's no guarantee that they will be better, but hopefully they will suck less. And so one of the things that I'm really passionate about is, if you are spending the company's money to bring people together in a synchronous meeting, then it better be important. And we are all taking time out of our day to be in this meeting. And our jobs as leaders is to move things forward. And so if we are attending meetings where things aren't moving forward, then what are we doing here? Why are we wasting time, resources, and energy on something that doesn't matter, or something that is, for maybe somebody's ego, maybe. But why are we doing this? What are we all doing here? And I'll feel like a lot of the times when you do have a toxic meeting culture, people don't know how to answer that question. They'll be like, well, it just is. I'm like, well, why? We're in tech, like we're supposed to ask this question, right? We're supposed to, question why we are doing things. We're supposed to improve upon things that, have been there in the past, disrupt the meeting culture, if you would, and really, ask ourselves, what are we doing here? What are we hoping to achieve? And so if I'm in meetings that don't move the needle forward, am I really doing my job? I'd say no. I'd say that my job at the end of the day is to unblock people and unblock projects and to move people's careers forward. That's what I'm here to do. And so if there is a very inefficient meeting that is just there, it's reoccurring, it's way too long, there's no agenda to it, there's no, action items that come out of it, what are we really doing here? Are we just doing this for appearances? Because if that's the case, then we have some bigger problems here. And so that means that there's something that we need to take a look at and we need to improve, that is symptomatic in meeting culture, but it might be something that's deeper within the culture of the organization.
Yeah, no, I think I couldn't have said it better myself. Danielle, this has been super insightful. So many different things, so many different takeaways and tactical tips as well. One of the questions that we ask all of the guests on the show is for all the managers and leaders looking to constantly get better at their craft. Are there any tips or resources or words of wisdom or just parting advice that you would leave them all with?
I would say try learning something from somebody with a completely different experience from you. Get uncomfortable. Sorry, get comfortable with being uncomfortable, because that's where a lot of growth comes from. And so I think we are used to doing that from, maybe a technology standpoint, but we may not necessarily be there 100% with our own personal growth. And so I have learned a lot over the last couple of years, learning about social issues from people who are different from me, who have different lived experiences. And so, really being able to dive into other people's lived experiences, learn how to say, I'm sorry, is incredibly important. And just reading a lot more and being able to put those things into practice. If you go to my GitHub repo, I have one for manager resources. I have a list of recommended readings that I have of things that I personally have learned a lot from and really grown from. And so that's something that I would definitely recommend checking out.
Yeah, and we'll definitely include that in the show notes. Danielle, thanks so much for doing this.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you so much, Aiden. I really enjoyed being here.